Hi, everyone. Welcome to tonight's mindfulness practices. I'm one of your hosts. I'm Frank, and I'm here with Vivian. Hi, Vivian.
Hi, Frank. Hi, everyone. Welcome.
If you're new here, welcome. If you've been here before, welcome back. This is a drop in class. It's suitable for any level of knowledge or practice. So you don't have to know, you don't have to have exposure to any of these ideas or practices prior to today to potentially benefit from today. And if you've been here before, then these practices and what we talk about will be building on top of some other things that we've done here before. Put a brief comment in chat if you've been here before and if you've been practicing. For example, one of the things we talked about last week was noticing where your shoulders are, how often our shoulders will get raised just out of habit. And one of the things we asked you to notice, if you wanted to, is where were your shoulders? And if you noticed that they were high, did you lower them? So that's one thing you could put in the chat. Another is, did you use any particular practice this week? Or notice any benefits from practice this week? Or have any personal insights from the practice? So, any of those three things in the attendee chat, it helps us get an idea of where are these ideas and practices landing for you. And also, they could be suggestions or ideas that other people go, hey, I want to try that. Just to let you know the skills in this toolkit. So we call it a toolkit, and there are three categories of skills: mindfulness, inquiry, resilience, and stress management. And they interrelate, they interact. If you want to download a copy of the slides, we're not going to describe each of these specifically today, but if you download the slides, you'll see a slide that defines what each one is. Each month we have a theme, and all of the classes relate to that theme. And this month's theme is, yikes, anxiety. So it'll be a month of conversation around anxiety. And Vivian is going to, I was going to say, wait, where did Vivian go? Hi, Vivian. I was feeling anxious there for a minute. Vivian is going to talk about what is anxiety.
I'll preface it by saying that anxiety was what brought me to these practices, and I can share about that over the course of the month. But I did have some pretty debilitating panic attacks and I realized that, I needed to rewire my brain. And when I started doing these practices slowly, they started diminishing, becoming fewer and fewer, and more time in between them until they were gone. That doesn't mean anxiety goes away, because it is a natural human reaction to stress. Whenever we come into contact with any sort of stressor, there are quite a few options. We can fight, flight, freeze in our place, or fawn, which is basically become overly, doting or fawning. But before that happens, there is that anxiety that kicks up inside of us that triggers one of these, might be all of them in different phases or different depending on what causes the anxiety to arise. So anxiety, I don't want us to see it as something negative. I hope that over the course of this month, you come to see it as something that is part of being human, but being able to also at the same time differentiate when it actually becomes a problem, becomes a challenge for you. And some of the ways that you can observe that is that you start noticing that you're experiencing anxiety when there really isn't an identifiable trigger. It'll just onset. If you're, the last anxiety attack I ever had, I was doing mindful eating. I was actually sitting and being really attentive to the experience I was having as I was chewing, as I was observing and smelling, tasting my food. So obviously that wouldn't have been a natural trigger for an anxiety attack. And there it was. Um, Again, when the anxiety actually creates an intense response, that is, you're like, whoa, I completely overreacted to that stimuli. Like, um, that's another way you can observe that anxiety is now moved into the realm of challenging and not necessarily serving a purpose. That it comes on more often, that it takes, in addition to it takes less and less of a trigger for it to come on, it actually shows up more and more often as your body's response to circumstances you find yourself in. That it lasts too long, that how long it stays here. So it's here, okay, but it stays here way longer and maybe even becomes protracted and starts building on other things in terms of thoughts and worries or whatever. Just your mind starts taking different things to maintain the anxiety level high. And when you see it interfere with your daily life and the quality of your life, that's another way that you can identify that it's a problem. So, how does mindfulness work with anxiety? Mindfulness practices allow us to build skills to be with any sort of challenging or difficult emotion, including anxiety or memories or any sort of future worries that we might be experiencing. Mindfulness also lets us explore the underlying stressors and worry and help us gird and build supports for ourselves so that we can be with whatever difficult experience we might be having. And it also helps us to expand the capacity that we have, like giving us like that extra muscle and foundation so that we don't actually constrict around our worries and our fears. A lot of anxiety, it has a lot of physical qualities, but I think we can all agree that one of them that's pretty common, we don't feel spacious and open and ready for whatever is to come. We actually feel constricted and tense around when around the situation when we're actually experiencing anxiety. And so the practice I wanted to offer today is see, hear, feel. Um, we're going to do it a little differently today in that I'm going to actually, before we actually do the practice, I'm going to go through the whole of the practice with you and tell you what each category, see, hear, feel, is going to, what you can look forward to as we do the practice. Because I really want you to be informed and ready when we actually go into the practice period to explore these things. Because if we look at see, hear, feel, all these are the three categories that basically describe how we move through our life. Everything is coming in through our senses. So whether we're seeing them internally through like playing a movie in our mind, the visual image that is kind of playing in our head, or we're actually seeing things external to us, or we're hearing the internal dialogue that we all have to some degree, versus actual sounds, ambient sounds around us, and feel like what are our actual physical body sensations, either due to like physical stimuli, like, oh, I'm feeling a little bit of coolness because the skin is exposed on my hand, whereas the skin, over here, over my shoulder doesn't feel as cool. Actual physical sensations based on environment. But then also, in English, we define feel in terms of emotions. So noticing what emotions are here and recognizing that emotions, we only know they're here because they have actual physical characteristics, and being able to start to tease out what those physical sensations are for each emotion. Each of us is going to experience emotions differently, and it's really an important skill to be able to start to notice just how anger arises inside of you, and building that that mental map for your mind to know these are the things that I experience when I experience anger or happiness. And, your mind is always going to go towards it, like it's going to want to magnify whatever is there. So if you teach it what happiness feels like in the body, if it starts even noticing a flavor of it, it'll like grab it with enough practice, it'll grab it and magnify it further. So the first category of that we're going to explore is C, and that is first we're going to start by looking out and just taking in whatever our eyes can take in without getting like caught up in the story. In the same way we do that with all our mindfulness practice, we don't get caught up in the story of what we're seeing. Like if you see something, you're looking out and you're seeing, you're just noting what's there. You're not actually, oh, I forgot to take that to the dry cleaners, or you don't start getting caught up in the story that it might trigger. You recognize, oh, there's a story to that my mind is taking me to. But then you kind of maybe move on to some other area, or you test yourself again with that same object and see, okay, the story has quieted down this time. So seeing out into the world, we have, for each of these categories, there is an active state where it's actually seeing the objects in your visual field. But there's also a restful state, and that restful state when we're looking out, I don't know if you may have experienced it. I experience it a lot when I'm at the beach, for example. I'm just kind of taking in the full scene. It happens a lot when I'm in nature. I'm not actually focused in on any particular object or part of my visual field, just kind of taking it all in. So you can always kind of do that piece. It kind of helps if you want to explore that right now, is just to let your eyes, instead of looking at the screen, just let the frontal view go soft and just notice it from the peripheral and kind of take in the 180 degrees. And you realize that I'm actually not focused on anything in particular. It takes a little bit of practice, but I think it's definitely accessible. Seeing in is about looking into what mental images arise in our mind. And a lot of times this is easier to notice when we close our eyes for a bit and give it a little bit of time. Maybe initially it's a blank screen, or maybe you're just seeing dark, light, shading from the room that you're in, or maybe there's floaters or colors or any sort of movement happening behind your eyelids, but really there's no actual image. That's actually the restful state of when you're seeing inwardly. So you can explore that. There's also the active state of when you close your eyes and all of a sudden all the mental images and memories from the past are playing, future plans, you're seeing yourself in the future. Maybe you're daydreaming, all of a sudden your meditation practice falls away into a daydream. So that's how you notice seeing in, oh, okay, I went into a daydream. Oh, I'm seeing mental image, of dinner. I'm planning it out in my head. So that is the seeing in and out categories. The same subcategories are available in hear and feel, and so we're going to walk through it. For hearing in, it's all about what you're hearing in your mental self-talk, that inner dialogue that sometimes feels like it never stops. That's the active state where you're hearing words, or you're hearing sentences, or it's whispers. The restful state is when you actually notice, even for a split second, and even for seeing that restful state, even if it's for a split second, you're like, ooh, it actually stopped for a second. So it doesn't have to be this protracted period of rest, as long as you can notice that it arises, and then maybe another thought, internal dialogue starts, and then it jumps to another internal dialogue, and then another one, and then all of a sudden there is a period of rest before the mind goes, oh yeah, no, let's start again. Hearing out is just all the ambient noises, the ones that are that you're experiencing in the room that you're in, the ones that are coming through the audio of your computer, like my voice. So you would take note of those. And of course, you can experience rest when there's ambient silence. That can be, we call it rest because it's not that like necessarily it feels restful. You might even feel a little bit like, whoa, what was that? Like it just stopped, right? So it might be a little bit jarring, in fact. So we call it rest because it actually, the activity stops and it rests. The last category is feeling, and feel in and out. So feeling out is all of your physical sensations, like just all the areas of pressure, maybe on the surface of your skin, or on the inside of the body. Your heartbeat, temperature, your sense of breathing, whether you're feeling it at the belly or at the chest, or maybe you're feeling the sensations at the nostrils. So rest in terms of feeling out is when you feel areas of your body where so it could be an area of your body where there's an absence of sensation, or it could be like a scan of the body where you actually don't feel any more sensations in your body. That's available as well. That one is not as common when we first start practicing, but it definitely is something that you can cultivate over time, to have like full body rest. But definitely and I'm sure you have over the course of the time that we've, if you've joined us for our prior sessions or had experiences with practicing in the past, in other venues, you've had areas where you're like, oh, my thumb actually is pretty blank. I don't have a sensation there, or, different areas of the body you might feel, oh, it's lacking in any sort of sensation. Feeling in, it's all about, and these categories are kind of just an attempt to help you organize your experience. So feeling in is all about sensing into your emotions. The active state is, where am I feeling it in the body? How is it exhibiting in that area of the body? The restful state of feeling in is experiencing relative and emotional peace, like operative word being relative. So it might be, and again, it could be for just a split second. It may not be this like protracted period and prolonged period of feeling no emotions at all. But as you can see, when we take all of these 6 categories, including the active and restful parts of each of them, that allows us to fold in every aspect of what we're experiencing moment to moment. You're never ever not going to be able to categorize anything that you're experiencing, including anxiety. So you might want to, and the reason why I'm explaining it in depth like this, and then we're going to do an extended practice of it, is because I want you to be able to apply it to things that are difficult, including anxiety, to see, oh, what causes the anxiety to arise? Am I in actual physical danger? Sometimes that's the case, right? Like when you are trying to cross the street and a car comes out of nowhere, you immediately have that immediate response. But how long does that stay with you? At that point, when it stays with you, are you reliving it in your mind? How are you reliving it? Is it a story? Is it a movie? Is there a dialogue of the sounds you were making, or what you said as the thing was happening? So you can actually start teasing out all the little aspects of it. And this practice I found really, really helpful, especially when I was trying to move from the panic attacks into just being at homeostasis, at a neutral state. So with that, I just invite you to stretch up and settle in. And before we practice, I do want to share that you can do this practice in any posture. I invite you not to do it in movement. So no walking or dancing or any, And that's only because it's not because you can't do it in movement. It's that movement brings another level of complexity to it, because what we're trying to do is develop a certain degree of concentration, a certain degree of clarity around how we're sensing into our body, and into what we're seeing. And then also to kind of maintain a certain amount of willingness and evenness of our demeanor relative to those things. And when we bring movement into it, it takes it up exponentially in terms of difficulty. So we're just starting. So it doesn't mean you can't do it in movement. It just means that we want to do it in stillness initially, so that we can learn the skills, so that we can slowly build up to practicing these things in simple movements and then more complex movements. So I invite you to get comfortable. You could do this lying down or sitting, even standing. Your eyes can be open or closed. We're going to, in the C portion, if I invite you to close your eyes even for just a little bit, just so you can see what that's like. Are you seeing a blank screen, or are you seeing floaters? What's happening? But you can actually do the rest of the practices with your eyes open or closed, whatever is comfortable. All you have to do is listen to my voice. I'll be prompting you. There will be periods of silence as I give you an opportunity to play and explore that particular prompt. See where the mind takes you. Does it stay with C? Does it stay with here? Does it jump around? Let's see what it does. Staying very gentle with yourself as you do that, because the mind is wily. And part of the practice is kind of building that concentration muscle. So you're not going to have any practice in concentration unless it like veers away and comes back. So I invite you to maintain a really gentle and friendly attitude around as you practice, staying really curious. What's happening here? Am I able to stick with it? And I invite you to just notice what is happening as you're doing these things. You can stop at any time if you need to, or you're like, this isn't resonating for me tonight. This isn't what I had in mind. Knowing that, if you're here, you got the recording and you're able to revisit it at any time over the course of the next year and be like, what was that first session about anxiety? What was that practice? So taking a few deep breaths in, let them be comfortable deep breaths. In through the nose. You can even sigh out the exhale. Doing that a couple of times at your own pace. And then whenever you're ready, just letting the breath come back to its natural rhythm. And we're going to start with our eyes open, seeing out, noticing all the images that you can take in through your visual space. I invite you not to move your head, right? Because that's part of movement. So keeping it limited to where your eyes go. You can use the label C every 5 to 10 seconds. Labels actually help you both as a reminder and as a way to bundle the experience you just had, that you were looking, you were observing. See, making sure that if you are going to use the label, that you maintain a really matter-of-fact, neutral tone with yourself. And you can do it out loud if that's comfortable, for sure. The way I'm doing it, see. Or you can do it with a soft whisper, see. Or you can just say it quietly to yourself in your mind. And I do invite you to explore all three to see which one actually suits you. See. See. Noticing if at any point your eyes kind of fall back into the sockets. If they don't, that's fine. If they ever rest and soften the gaze so as to not pull in any one image, but really just kind of take in the whole image. And if at any point you do experience that, you can label that as rest. Otherwise, continuing to use the label C. And now, if it's comfortable, you can close your eyes. And we're going to start looking in at anything, any image that might pop into your visual field with your eyes closed. Nothing might actually show up. It might just be a blank screen. In that case, you wouldn't use the label C, you would use the label rest. But if you have a visual memory, or you're seeing yourself into the future, even if it's, 30 minutes into the future, anything that might be coming up in your visual thinking space, again, not getting caught up in the story of why it's arising. But definitely recognizing that you're seeing something and gently using the label C. 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 Now we're going to shift our area of focus from the visual field to the auditory field. And as we take in the ambient sounds, the ones that are close, the ones that are far, the ones that are loud, the ones that are soft, you can use the label here. If you notice silence, ambient silence, you can always use the label rest. Doing your best to just stay with sounds. Labeling them now and again. Here. 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 And now shifting to the internal dialogue that might be happening. Again, beginning to notice if there is any. As you hear words or sentences or full-blown scripts, labeling it as here. All the self-talk, the audio track to any thoughts that might be here. Labeling it as here. 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 And you might notice, if you do have an inner dialogue, that there might be some visual images that arise as you do that. You're seeing something at the same time. And you can also label it as see here, because they're both there at the same time. Or hear see. And that's basic components of a thought. You're either hearing something internally, you're seeing something internally, or you're seeing and hearing something internally. You might notice that one thought gives way to another thought, to another thought, to another thought. Doing your best to just label them in bundles. If they're just internal dialogue is here, waiting a bit, bundling them as see here, if that's what just happened. And of course, you can experience rest when the internal dialogue happens to silence, even for the shortest moment. If you noticed it, you can label it. Rest. And now we're going to shift the area of focus one more time to the field of our physical sensations. And for that, we're going to be using the label of feel. So just beginning to widen your awareness around your body, on the surface of the body, on the inside of the body. You're not looking for anything in particular, but every now and again, recognizing that there have been physical sensations that caught your attention, and using the label feel. 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 And now squaring in on any emotions that might be here right now, and where you might be feeling them in your body. Staying with that label of feel, but moving your awareness as you identify that, this physical sensation is actually being caused by an emotion. It's not just there on its own like these other ways that I can have physical sensations. And if there are no emotional, physical sensations coming up, you can use the label rest. You might even want to bask and relish that rest if it's here. How often is it that we can say we are just coasting? Otherwise, staying with the label of feel. Feel. So for those that often practice with breathing meditation, you can actually do it now and just label it as feel, because you're sensing into the breath itself. And if you actually hear your own breathing, you can label it feel here or hear feel. And now, just as an experiment, I invite you to bring in the seeing and the hearing and the feeling. And every 5 to 10 seconds, just open yourself up to your experience and label what fields are being activated. So sometimes all three will be activated, and you can actually use the label see, hear, feel. Or maybe only two, such as see, hear, feel, hear, feel. Or it might just be the one of them. See, hear, feel. So just experiment for a bit with that, seeing what comes in, how you're able to bundle it, recognizing that there is no perfect way of doing it. So as you're labeling, if you happen to think, ooh, I actually missed, there was a here in there and I just said see, feel, know that this next moment is going to offer you another opportunity to label. So really not getting too bogged down around how you're labeling. These labeling techniques are just meant to help you stay on track. They're not actually a tool to judge the practice. So staying gentle. Now taking a moment to offer yourself a bit of gratitude, noting that you could have been doing an infinite number of activities for these few minutes, but you actually chose to dedicate it to building this skill, and recognizing that even though we practice as individuals and we gain personal benefits from practicing, that those benefits actually touch others in the way we end up interacting with them, maybe with more patience or more generosity or greater kindness and understanding. So while we personally benefit from the practice, all those who come into contact with us also reap the benefits of our practice. Now taking a deep breath in the same way that we began, and exhaling with a sigh. And taking another deep breath in and exhaling, becoming aware of the space that you're in. If your eyes are closed, opening them and looking around the space, the room. As we shift from practice, I invite you to take some stretches, letting your body do what it needs to, and that it was maintaining stillness, relative stillness for that extended period, yawning, stretching, whatever you need.
Thank you for the practice. And I'm I, so one of the questions. So I'm trying to. So anxiety trigger around going to the doctor. A lot of people feel that. Um, could you say a little bit about like how this practice might help with managing or easing the anxiety that somebody might feel either going there or being there with a doctor or a nurse or I guess any kind of medical circumstance?
Yeah. Um, so tracking your experience, you can never go wrong with tracking your experience moment to moment, right? Let's start at that baseline. Um, let's also add to it the reality that it's actually anxiety inducing. There's an entire term for it called white coat syndrome, that when we actually, people get their blood pressure checked, and it'll be 10, 20 points over what it is when they're checking it at home. And it's not for lack of calibration of their home unit. It's that when they come to the doctor, all of a sudden they have this elevated anxiety around, and it's normal, right? I don't want to get into all the reasons why it's normal, but part of it is just the way the dynamic happens. Like the idea is like we walk into that room and all of a sudden we're not the experts about ourselves, or we kind of have to relinquish a piece of that agency that we have. There's so many levels to it. Um, so tracking to your experience, I mean, just in the fact that what I've just broken down, these pieces, if you can touch into each one and how you're experiencing them, are there thoughts involved? Are there emotions here? As you realize, as we were walking through those categories of see, hear, feel, we weren't judging what was arising. There was nothing about it that there was not one area where you could have had a wrong visual, internal or external image, or a wrong ambient or internal sound, right? Or a wrong internal or external physical sensation. So, in that same way, recognizing that it's absolutely normal, they've given it a name. I don't know if that helps, labeling it as white coat syndrome, but staying really close to your moment to moment experience as those things are happening. I would love someone to report back, like, what was that like? That, oh my God, now I'm having this thought. Oh, now I'm worried and I'm feeling it as like a clenching in my belly, going through that and just staying very close to your actual experience.
Well, so there's a another part to that question that I want to ask you about also. Um, so the question is my reaction a conditioned response? And why can't I get the logical part of my brain? I always have to do this around logical part of my brain. Why can't I get the logical part of my brain? Why can't it take control, right? So this notion of cognitively, I recognize. Now, here's the tricky part, right? So this isn't in the question, but right, this is me adding on to it. Cognitively, there's a judgment that I shouldn't have the reaction I'm having. Can you say a little bit about why that cognition? One is this conditioned behavior. The other is, why isn't that cognition enough to shift it?
Okay, so I'm going to answer it in a way that maybe you're not. I want you to answer in the way you think from like a therapeutic side of things, but mine is going to come from like a, you know, mindfulness teacher. I want to understand, why would it help to know if it was a conditioned response? Like, ask yourself that. What would it mean if we called it a conditioned response, or it isn't? It is, at the end of the day, it's what's here. And it's asking us to tend to it. And so, and the reason why I couch it that way, it's not because I think it's a bad question. It's actually a really valid question, but it's that comes back to the idea is like, if we categorize something, if we can answer the why it's here, somehow it'll solve for it. And that's not the case. That's not how it works, right? Just because we know the why it's here, that's the story. Okay, now we know the story. Did it actually create any relief? Or did that internal situation still need tending to? And more often than not, you're going to realize that you still need to give attention to yourself, and that all of these kind of categorizings of like, oh, this is my logical brain. Why can I get that online? Because you're human, right? How are we supposed to? I smashed my hand in the car door, and people were like, but you're the mindfulness expert. As if I'm not allowed to have a human moment of lapse, right? That like, so, and so I had to stay gentle with myself and kind of remind people, well, yeah, but I'm a human first.
And we're not mindfully aware all that continuously.
Yes.
Right. And even then, right. So another way of saying that is, well, maybe I was on something other than the hand and the door.
Yeah. Yeah. And maybe I wasn't. But guess what happened? I smashed my hand in the door, and immediately I went into feel in, because the pain was, it was bleeding, and I was also seeing out, right? There was a lot of see out and feel out and feel in. There were a lot of emotions because there's a lot of judgment that arises around, how did I just do? I did it to myself, which is the ultimate, like,
So I'm appreciating what you're saying. Right? So the language I often use is cognitions, like it's both and, can be helpful, right? Because like the cognition of its conditioning allows me to potentially allows me to feel like it's not my fault, or I didn't do something wrong, or this isn't, say, pathological, right? So in a way, that cognition helps thwart other cognitions about it. And then I think culturally, right, there's a lot of psychology has a long history of like, let's go figure out why. And a lot of psychology isn't very useful. Judgment on my part, bias on my part, and right. So, however helpful a cognition is, or isn't, right? Because the cognition that it's my fault is going to make it harder than the cognition that it isn't my fault. However, as you're saying, I'm still left with, and now what? So the idea is, with this C here, I'm aware that it's a cognition. And now I have a choice. Am I going to try to like replace this cognition with a better cognition? A lot of times that's what we're trying to do. My own relationship to cognition is that mostly it's an attempt to get away from what's here right now. Because what I'm trying to do is construct a story that either makes my immediate experience mostly more tolerable. Right. So in that description, right, the best cognition is going to be limited. And the better effort would be acknowledge what is. And then I think of it as like making the adjustment to where's the trouble right now. There are two places of trouble. Like when you close your hand on the door. One is where the door met the hand, right? The physical sensations. And then the other is the thoughts and the story about it that make it harder to be with it, because the thought or the story, like I always think about this. So if it's not my fault, then I shouldn't be feeling what I'm feeling, and yet I still feel what I feel. And if it is my fault, then do I get some relief from feeling what I'm feeling? No, I still feel what I feel. So this is not to say that thoughts are bad and stories are bad, in part because they're inevitable. So let's not render them as bad. And making that distinction. I think it is valuable to go, it's conditioning, because that potentially takes away or eases the judgment we subject ourselves to, especially when the logical mind says this shouldn't be, and it still is. And so that's another reason I think having a name for it is also helpful, because it says, it's not my fault. And I'm still here with the high blood pressure. And
one of the things, as you were sharing, I was remembering another experience that I had in my early years it was actually with Larry Yang. He's a meditation teacher. You guys can look him up if you're curious. And I was like, Larry, I got all this pain. I'll just wake up. I was relatively young back then. And I was like, I just wake up and I'm in pain. Like, I didn't do anything. I don't understand why I'm waking up with pain. And he just like listened to me kindly, really gently. And he goes, Vivian, why is not a spiritual question. And so he was coming at it from a spiritual place, right? And then that was it. That was his answer. There wasn't any of this explanation that we just gave. It was just, Vivian, why isn't this spiritual? I'm like, thanks a lot. I gotta walk, go and see. And I had to sit with that. What did that mean? Why is not a spiritual question? And it was like, why doesn't solve for the physical pain? There's still, maybe the pain is a signal to tend to that part of my body. Take care of me, right? Your body doesn't have verbal, like a language other than pain and sensations, right? To say, hey, I need help. So maybe it was signaling, right? So I had to here I am sharing it with you all these years later. So
I love and hate that answer. Right? And isn't it interesting that I only love it when I know what he meant, but if I didn't, I just go like, why do people even like you? We're out of time, and I just want to, right? So somebody asked, can you say all of that one more time as a brief summary? Having a reason gives us a story to try to make sense of it, but then what? So this is not, come back next week and the week after, because we're talking about this all the time, to try to concisely in 30 seconds, because we're over, say it this time. It's inevitable that we make stories up, or you could even say that stories happen. And part of that is because this present moment right now includes the past and the future. And so stories are about our experiences that have happened and could happen. And right. And so they're happening. Right. So, and who knows? Some people say it's an activity of the brain. I like to playfully say it's just outgas from gut bacteria, that we think we're evolved, and really all of our thoughts are just like bacteria gas. So who knows? Except that it's there. It's there. And I have not met anybody who doesn't have a story. I guess, maybe you could argue about thinking, but then that's a whole nother slew of cognitions. The thing that often happens, though, is we try to construct a story that would make it possible not to be in this moment. So if I say I was stupid and I got my hand caught in the door, does that help? Sometimes people feel like it does. I think that's a mistaken notion, because they feel like I should be more careful. When an accident like that doesn't mean you weren't careful. that's what we always think. Whenever there's an
Mm-hmm.
accident, you weren't careful enough. It's like
Mm-hmm.
sometimes
Mm-hmm.
however careful you are isn't enough. The universe conspires against
Mm-hmm.
us. That's another cognition.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So this idea is
Mm-hmm.
stories are going to happen anyway. And the invitation here is see in, hear in, and recognize it as thinking. The experience is
Mm-hmm.
thinking, and notice what happens if you can sort of observe it or relate to it dispassionately, not get caught up in it. And then I think it's possible to have the kind of experiences where you go, this is what I say to myself all the time. I either go, that's just your opinion, Frank, or that's just what you think, or, oh, look at that story, right? So not a lot of negative judgment, right? Because it's
Mm-hmm.
inevitable. And an observation of, oh, yeah, look, thinking is happening. What's my relationship to thinking? Right now, my
Mm-hmm.
relationship is, can I think my way out of the pain in my hand? And I would like to say the answer is no.
Mm-hmm.
So we always need more time. So come back next week. So the theme for the month is yikes, anxiety. Next week, we'll talk about interrupting anxiety loops. And this is related to several of the questions, which is like, why can't I get my logical mind online and interrupt
Mm-hmm.
these things that I know? This is when I do know, because often I don't recognize it, right? Anxiety has a really
Mm-hmm.
great way of convincing us that whatever it's telling us is true. But come back,
Mm-hmm.
we'll have some more practice.
And we didn't
Uh-huh.
do the little slide that says like your home
Oh,
practice, but practice see, hear, feel. Like as you're eating dinner,
oh
as
yeah.
you're coming to fall asleep, like what's happening? Do that see, hear, feel at your own pace. We did it at our pace, but just as you're going about your day, you can definitely practice it.